Radio XYB 33. The Whisperer. Tonight's episode, The Outsider. Our story begins in a quiet little town in Connecticut, where everybody pitches in to help the community. They seem so friendly. But behind closed doors, there's another story. Alan Brooks sits behind his computer, working on his next story and artwork. He likes making videos and putting them up on the internet. He works for about an hour this morning and then decides to go out and get a little breakfast. He didn't realize there was a sidewalk sale going on. He remembers hearing something about that this week, and he always wanted to pitch in and help. But you forgot again, didn't you, Alan? He makes his way through the crowded street, but he feels a little strange. Something about the eyes. The men's eyes seem lifeless, but the women's eyes, they seem cold, staring. They look right through you. He finds a table at the diner and waits for that young waitress to take his order, the one that's always friendly. "Hello, my friend. How are you?" They have a little friendly conversation, and then Alan orders sausage, egg, and cheese on a hard roll and a cup of coffee. And the waitress pats him on the shoulder like she always does as she leaves. After breakfast, he stops at the park like he always does to relax. There he meets his friend Tom, a custodian at the school. But today, Tom seems a little on edge. Alan feels he wants to tell him something, but he doesn't know how. Just then, a young, attractive woman stops by. Alan doesn't know her, but he knows she's a teacher at school. "Having lunch, Tom?" "Yes, Miss Craig." "I think it's time you go back to work. And don't forget to set up the teacher's lounge for a meeting tonight." "Yes, Miss Craig." "I hope he wasn't bothering you." "No, not at all. We were just talking." "I forgot we were having a sidewalk sale today. I always wanted to volunteer and help out, but I seem to forget." "Yes, we know. Maybe you should come to our meeting tonight. I think you'll enjoy yourself." "Yes, yes, I will." She's a very attractive woman, isn't she, Alan? But then you remember your friend Tom. That man looked scared. The sign outside the school said the meeting is in the teacher's lounge. That's on the second floor. When Alan enters the building, he sees Miss Craig. She meets him. "Hello, Alan. I'm so glad you can come." "Thanks, Miss Craig. But how did you know my name? I don't believe I told you." "It's my job. And please call me Nancy. Come on, the meeting's about to start." The teacher's lounge is filled with women, and 2 women sit at the head of the table. Nancy shows Alan his seat, and then she takes her place at the head of the table. A mature woman, very attractive, stands and introduces herself. I'm Barbara Wall, the principal. Nancy Craig you already met. And this is Ann Parker. Mrs. Wall starts the meeting. They talk about the internet. They're concerned what their children are seeing. So they decide they're going to control what comes in and out of this town. All the women applaud. Control the internet, Alan thinks. That doesn't sound right. And then he notices Ann Parker tapping away at her laptop. After the meeting, Nancy introduces him to Ann Parker. She says Mrs. Wall wants to meet him too, but right now she's busy. Ann tells Alan she's been reading what he's been putting up on the internet. You're very clever, Mr. Brooks. I'm going to have to keep an eye on you. When Alan gets home, he decides to do a little work. But his computer says, account closed. Account closed? Who closed it? And why? And then he remembers what was said at the meeting. That woman, what was her name? Parker. Ann Parker. The next morning, he walks to the school to talk to his friend Tom. Tom's surprised to see him. You shouldn't be here. You can't be in the building without permission. Tom looks frightened. Then they hear footsteps. I think you wanted to tell me something yesterday. No, I have nothing to say. Really, you better go. Alan turns and sees Mrs. Wall standing behind him. Go back to work now, Tom. And as for you, Mr. Brooks, I don't appreciate anyone being in my building without my permission. Alan tries to explain he just came to talk to his friend, but Mrs. Wall doesn't say a word. She just escorts him out of the building. Something is going on in this town, and it starts right here at the school. He decides to come back later at the end of the day and talk to Nancy. Alan watches everybody picking up their children, and then he sees Nancy. He calls to her. You shouldn't have come here, Alan. Well, I just want to explain what happened. I know what happened. Go home. Wait for my phone call. We need to talk to you. All he can do is watch her get into her car and drive away. And then he noticed Mrs. Wall is staring at him from her office window. Those eyes, those cold eyes. Nancy drives him to a house way back in the woods, very private. Where are we going? To Ann Parker's house. Mrs. Wall will be there too. We need to talk to you. About what? Nancy doesn't answer. She just keeps on driving. Alan sits before the three women. They tell him they like to control everything that goes on in this town. And Ann Parker thinks she has to monitor everything you do from now on. But what about my right of free speech? The three women look at themselves. Then they stand before Alan. And all he can do is look into three pairs of cold eyes. Pain starts in his head. It grows. The eyes get closer. The pain grows stronger. You don't want to be an outsider. You want to be a part of the community. When he comes to, he's more than willing to do what they say. Mrs. Wall tells him that she and Nancy have some business to take care of. Ann Parker takes him to his room, where he'll be living and working from now on. In his room, a little piece of him starts to come back. What just happened to you, Alan? And then he hears a man in pain, and he remembers what just happened to him. Yes, Mrs. Wall. Yes, Miss Craig. No more, please. I beg of you, no more. No more. There's something disturbing about hearing a grown man cry like a child. Alan walks to the door of his room. He wants to see what's going on. The door. It's locked. I'll try to tell you more stories of Alan Brooks from this little town in Connecticut, if my account isn't closed, and if he's still Alan. You've been listening to Radio XYB 33.